myself to put up the chat as well, because I know some of you will be reaching out in that way. Right, great. So let's continue. And so the question now is, how does arts and culture now connect to society, apart from what we discussed last week, saying that we recognize that arts and culture is very dynamic in society, as Tonya was Tonya was suggesting, beyond the aesthetic, recognizing that it has value not only in terms of the fact that it makes people feel good or for its aesthetic purposes, but certainly it would seem to be, from its very nature, being a dynamic concept, that of course it could have varied meaning. And we know that we relied on Throsby to explain to us how it's possible to see that beyond the aesthetic in his rendition of what culture could mean beyond the idea of an aesthetic. And he, in particular, gives emphasis to this notion of culture having an economic importance, by explaining to us that that connection between economics and culture can be seen as based on a transaction, that as long as there are persons performing and persons are watching, that is an idea of demand and supply. That's an exchange. So the thing is, class, we want to understand now what it is that guides that exchange. What is the underpinning there? And the underpinning, in many respects, has to do with the first point that I have here, choice. So let's think about it. Choice is made through a decision, not so? If it is that you decide to go to a show, you're sitting in an audience watching a dance performance. Have you not made a choice to be there, class?
Yes, you have.
Yes,
And
miss.
in
Yes,
making
miss.
that choice, let's say it's dance season, the fact that you are in that particular audience, maybe you're looking at, can you give me the name of a popular dance production? Here, there's a season coming up just now. What's that one called? Is it?
Coco. Coco.
That's right. And well, we don't want to be disparaging across them, but let's just say you decide you've been waiting all year for them. Does that not therefore suggest that your choice is based in something as well? So not just the choice of dance, but that you are waiting on this particular dance season. Does that not also suggest that your choice is somewhat steeped in some reason?
Yes.
Right. So
I
that is
guess.
you who's saying I guess. I want to guess who that is, but maybe let me look and
Okay.
see who that is. Oh, it's Kelly. You know, I thought it was Ava. Right.
Wait.
What why you
Why
say
me?
why you say I guess though? What you
Well,
just
it's
just get up and throw yourself into the dance production?
no, it's kind of slim pickings. So you got to wait on anything that is around for dance, especially, So
But why is that? Why dance and not to go into, Lord, what was the last club they had in Trinidad? Club residence. Why to go to the dance production as opposed to go club residence? Or why to go to the dance show as opposed to where Quasi boy to go where is it, Quasi Four Roses and Sour? Why that as opposed to that and
Yeah,
taking a
roses, roses.
why not? Would you not say that your choice is steeped in something, Antonio? Some of us having audio problems today. Type in the chat if anything, right? Is the choice not steeped in something? And y'all are delayed, and I don't want to delay us as I wait for you. So I hope you get your audio going because we want to have our lively discussion as usual. But I am saying to you,
I was calling my name, miss.
yes, I was calling your name, but I don't know, like you step out there a little bit on me.
I was hearing you.
So
I don't know what the interest.
I am I want you to contemplate this. That choice is based on some kind of value construct.
Mm-hmm.
Not so?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That you would decide that you would play mass in is it K2K alliance as opposed to tribe. In the
Mm-hmm.
first instance, has a choice not been made?
Yes.
Yes.
And in making a choice and you actively go and pay now, have you not made a decision?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the
But
things you value.
who said that? Is that Kevin?
Yep.
Correct. And so that is why it's important for us to understand cultural value. Let's just take it a step further. And based on the things that you value, is that not what motivates you to spend?
Yeah.
And so my point is today, class, is that that idea of value is what allows for us to see why certain aspects of the arts and culture would mean so much and why some would mean so little. Am I still making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Not that we are going to have a lamentation tonight, but let me put it to you. Does that not explain why it is your budget every year would have 0.0003% for the arts and culture?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you get through any better as it is a pen, tourism, but you go get through, but you ain't gonna get through in no obvious and evident kind of way, because of course it's tied to something else.
Mm-hmm.
But would the argument I've made so far not explain that?
Yep.
Right. And therefore, if we can understand that in the context of how governments, particularly in the region, would value and view culture, can we not see that by extension, this is how we treat with the arts and culture in terms of education, in terms of how political parties see it, in terms of how communities see it, why some communities may value it more than others, and vice versa? Can we not see? You see? Because the point is that anytime one has choice, one is going to make a decision, and that decision is going to be informed by a value construct. And as long as you have that, it means, therefore, one can always, if you can understand that, one can always be able to explain what is the disparity between some arts and culture and others. It also helps you to understand why is it that some aspects of the arts and culture will be commodified to the point that they are popular culture, and why some are commodified where they remain what they call high art.
Mm.
And we want to grapple and take a look at these kinds of discussions today. So far, so good. Any questions or comments? Right. So it is also that when we look at the idea or the notion of cultural value, it also gives us a context to appreciating the ways in which the arts and culture are commodified, as I was just mentioning, and not commodified. So, for example, when one looks at, um, let's think of heritage, there are some heritage forms that we are comfortable with being commodified. What is an example of heritage that we're comfortable with being commodified? And do we appreciate what the word commodification means? We mentioned it last week. Maybe I should take a step back and make sure that we're clear on that. Do we understand what we mean by the word commodified? Anyone?
Does that mean turning something into something that could be sold, or like putting like a monetary value on it, making it a
Yes.
commodity?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. Yes. Go ahead, Roxanne. Can you speak or are you gonna type in the chat?
I'm not sure if y'all hearing.
Yes,
Yeah,
we.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
To add to that, I just wanted to say that is mass produced. So
Yeah,
yeah, so Kevin was saying it's like a basic commodity, basically that's tradable and mass produced.
that's
So
right. So the trick to it being commodity or for making money, as Kevon would have stated, is that it is mass produced because it has a broad mass appeal. So this point that I'm making here, when I say that in understanding cultural value, it gives context to appreciating the ways in which the arts and culture are commodified and not commodified. So I'm asking, what of heritage that we may not want commodified? Is there an aspect of heritage that we have that we would prefer not to see it commodified? And if so, what is that? Yes. Who is G? That's Janae? Roxanne, you want to go again or your hand still is up? Tanya, what is an aspect of heritage that we would prefer not to see commodified? Or
I mean,
you're cool with everything being commodified? Let's
heck,
say.
heck no. But I think like one of the best examples of that is Carnival, because it has so many different cultural aspects to it. And
Mhm.
like what we see now is the like commodification of Carnival through this like, very
You
surface.
don't want it commodified.
Well, no, well, it's like it becomes
I
a
want it
different thing
commodified.
because you want it to be
Tatiana, you
exported.
want it commodified, girl? Me too, because if it don't, I ain't had no job.
That's why I'm saying that's what's
And if
going on.
and I don't know why all you sitting down here doing this course.
Ah, but
Then
what's
see,
the
I
difference
will
between,
take this off
like,
the table and who teaching, who need it, in bother to come here and Patreon could go and what did
Hello.
is it Shadow or Kitchener say plant peas in Tobago kind of thing and I go ahead and join her. Le- Yeah, I am challenging you. Is it all aspects of carnival?
no, because like what I was gonna say is like at one hand you obviously want Carnival to be an export like of the country, but on the other hand what we see now is like all of the pretty masses the one that's being exported, and you like lose the like heritage aspect of it, meaning like where Carnival comes from, and the more I don't know how to say grassroots, I guess, aspects of Carnival sort of get lost in that commodification process because they're not deemed as
So which
valuable.
parts you don't want commodity? I put in only on I put in because she said carnival. And me my thing is crop over, so I could stay out of this debate. I am the referee here. So what aspects you don't want commodified? Ava, Patreon. That is how you're coming in that order. Tell me, Ava, what you don't want commodified.
Well, I agree with commodifying carnival. Um, um, as I what I think what I was gonna say is that it leads back to the discussion we had last week, where I think we just automatically assume that in order to commodify some part of our culture, we need to to mass produce it to cater to a certain audience.
And that is why
That,
Tonya is grappling. Yes,
yeah, that's why Tanya got playing.
yes,
um,
yes,
just want
yes,
to use
yes.
I want to use the Camberley riots as an example of something that hasn't been commodified, but it's always sold out for every carnival. Like not sold out because it's not commodified, but it's
But is it
always
not
well attended.
commodified? Isn't what they're doing a form of commodification? Patreon.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Eva. Sorry, my apologies.
I
Before
am.
the question.
So I've been to Camberley for the past 2 years, and my understanding of it is that well, I haven't it is there is they're not earning any money from it. There isn't an
Hmm?
admission charge. Um, I
They're not?
suppose maybe
Of
some
course,
sort of
earning.
Well,
or
I
some
trouble.
uh,
Check me scratching my head now. My head is too hurt with that one, boy.
no,
Well,
so
I
in
I was working in
in
Camberley for the past
some
3 years.
Yeah, you get some sort of payment.
So let me clarify then, right? And which is why I said that I've been there for the past 2 years. So I don't know, maybe prior to that, or there's some aspect of it that I'm not privy to, but the audience doesn't pay. So that I guess that's more accurate to say the audience doesn't pay a fee,
We go
right?
come back. Ava, remember what you said there? We go come back to that later in the lecture. I'm going to interject and say what Kelly is saying here in the chat to come by Patreon. Kelly says, I want it all commodified. However, I want to retain some sacred parts. I don't want the creativity to be sacrificed for what is more or most popular. Tell me, how that sounding? So I'm asking, what are the parts that we want sacred? And why we want them sacred? Are we still on Carnival? I find Carnival.
Oh, come on, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry?
Hello?
Who's speaking? Go ahead, Patreon.
That's kind of the point I was going on to. I agree with the commodification of Carnival, but while we commodify, we must retain the intrinsic value and the traditional and heritage aspects that are indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago, because we could commodify a product, and then when it gets recommodified by another country or by another region, they could put their spin on it, and then it will start to lose that particular heritage value. And I believe that lies with the what I should say, the government. I just saying it plain out. It lies in with the government, because I'll use Guinea for an example. Guinea did something like this. I think it was in the 1970s, where they chose like a group of their leading percussionists and drummers, and they send them out to particular countries to do these free workshops. Everybody had to play the same thing, teach the same thing. And one of the drummers, he continued, his name was Mami Dikita, and he continued pushing Guinean culture, and they basically did that for like 5 to 10 years. Now, the djembe, which is something that was born in that particular African region, is in every country in Trinidad and in Trinidad and Tobago in the world. And that basically was their thing that they had in their mind, commodifying that aspect of their culture, but letting the world get to know their culture, but still holding that intrinsic value of what it is. So now, so now they create a sort of a market for people to want to come to the country and learn about the culture and learn about their dance culture, their drumming culture. And basically they created a tourist market in itself. And I think we could do the same thing with Carnival.
But so the question is, the fact that we want to do, and I thank you all for your sincere comments, because they're quite useful for what I'm asking and leading up to. The fact that you want to do that is seeped in your feelings, your sentiments, not so? It is steeped in what you consider to be important to your being, your identity, your cultural identity, and most certainly to your traditions. And Throsby has a response to that, which we'll get to shortly. But I want to ask the flip side of that, now that you've declared yourself in that sense. What aspects are okay to be commodified? And I'm seeing Kelly is saying the ritual around traditional historical knowledge can be commodified, but policed heavily, possibly with copyright enforcement, as would musical and plays offered by the likes of Disney, etc., be offered for reproduction around the world. Interesting. So that is it okay then for me to do the old yard in the commodified way that I do? Is that all right? I think there's only about 3 people who might have seen the old yard. I don't know who else has. That'd be Antonia, Roxana, Dominic.
It should, I visited there once. It should be okay with the owners. I think the owner or whoever is the person that created the old yard or has trademark or into that intellectual permission for it should have a say in whether it be reproduced or not. It shouldn't just be reproduced because, oh, it looks good and I feel like putting this on stage in my country, we're producing or making a movie out of this. I think they should at least have a say in it being reproduced and at least receive credit and some form of revenue from it.
And you don't think, if I go with Roseanne's comment here in the chat, if everything is commodified, it will lose value? Is it therefore that we have to be careful as to how far we commodify? Suppose our value is that we believe we should just be making money. Is that a dangerous thing in terms of what we've discussed last week and in terms of what we're saying about arts, culture, and society? Do we consider that to be dangerous, or do we believe that if we police it enough, we should be okay? Anyone wants to take that one? Do we consider it to be dangerous if it is that our value construct or our value system is that we should be making money? Tonya?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, like, we live in under capitalism, everybody ought to make $1. But at the same time, if everything that you do is out of the basis of like a monetary transaction, then you completely transform the way in which you're interacting with whatever you're creating. If we're talking about the arts, if you're creating art simply for the fact that you want to make $1, at the end of the day, what's the implications for that, like, as if you want to get into like what that means for like intrinsic value, what that means for like spirit, what that means for the entire sort of ecosystem, what art really constitutes, and you sort of bastardize it in a sense, a little bit.
Do we think that it is possible then, based on what Tonya is saying there about the intrinsic value and the spirit? Do you think it's possible to see those as ingredients that we can put inside of there and arrive at a place of commodification? Because I believe all of us have accepted, or most of us, that we need commodification because it's what's generating employment for many of us. It's what gives the rationale for why we now have this at Cape and what have you. We see that entrepreneurship, creative entrepreneurship, is important to our communities and our society. So do you think there's a way in which we can use that spirit and that intrinsic element that Tonya was just talking about to help us to arrive at a place of commodification? Dominique, I see you put up your hand there. Go ahead. Then we can have Ava, and then I believe Kelly.
I wasn't sure if I share the same perspective in terms of like commodification and stuff like that. I think that if you want anything to be created, you could place a monetary value to like literally anything. Even artists who create art for sale, like you could put a value on anything. And even if you wanted to live your life as an artist without receiving payment for what you've done, some money had to pass down in a chain somewhere for you to be able to do that in this world, well, in this capitalist society, I guess. So I just wanted to say that.
Interesting. And I know that the term capitalist society was already inserted, and I'm very happy to hear that. James, you were going to say something? Antonio wants to come in.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, especially in the world that we are now, maybe thinking about the approach could be an idea of sustainability. So there is like this balance of maintaining some kind of harmony with what we think is with a way for them to move forward and
We're getting somewhere.
So
Yes.
that's what I was thinking.
Antonio, thank you. Yes. Go ahead, Antonia.
Just now, it's just this app is stressing me out. I was doing all kind of thing. All right. I want some. I'm just looking for some clarity. Is it that when something is commodified, that money, like some kind of monetary value is placed it, or could commodifying something means you're just trying to get people to value what you value.
That's a pretty
'Cause
interesting
even
point.
if you want to be an artist, you want to be an artist and you don't want to work for money, as in you have an next job where you're just creating art, wouldn't you just want people to appreciate what you create, even whether they're paying for it or not? Because right
And
now
is that commodification? Because commodification, if so we have to go and revisit the readings on commodification. But commodification, the idea inside of commodification is that there's that circuit of cultural production going on, and it's all towards dissemination, towards this thing becoming pervasive. And being pervasive means that it has broad market appeal. And chances are, yes, some money going to be jumping up inside of there. From the time the artist wants to be known in some way, there's going to, remember what Crosby says, there's going to be some kind of exchange. And as long as there's exchange, it means that an economizing framework has come into play, even in the not-for-profit context.
okay.
Yes, yes, yes. So the thing is, I am very glad to hear the others mention in this context in which we are living, in this capitalist time, not discounting what the others said before that, but just that those latter comments give credence to why this second point is there in terms of why it's important to understand the relevance of why it's important to gauge the relevance of understanding cultural value, because it can also help us to understand why there is this circuit of cultural production and consumption. And in a sense, Antonia's question has brought us there to some degree. The fact of the matter is, when you go and you look at Negus's discussion of the circuit of cultural production, if you just Google the circuit of cultural production, you will see that it is not a case of making art for art's sake, and that the idea or the notion of the circuit of cultural production, or the production of culture circuit, sometimes you'll see it referred to as POC, was context in a capitalist framework. It really is about the way in which culture and the arts can be produced in a way that there's this cycle where it can be repeated. And of course, the repetition of it is towards generating returns, monetary in particular. But the returns, as we have recognized, are not only necessarily monetary, they can also have socioeconomic impacts in terms of community building, community development, community engagement. It's like my P's, enhanced value in terms of person's practice and so on and so forth, right? So that James's point about balance, to me, especially for us in small developing economies, is quite critical. That there has to be an understanding or an appreciation of why it is that some arts are commodified and some are not, for us to make those decisions as to what we feel should not be overrun by commodification, and what we as a people, as a society, should be comfortable with for commodification. And therefore, by extension, recognizing out of that idea of cultural value, how then we can manipulate that circuit of cultural production for our own sustainability, for our own future's sake. And to me, that is the balance. So there's a balance in the first instance of appreciation, of appreciating what could be commodified and what not. And then there's that balance in terms of appreciating that we are operating in a global capitalist system, and how understanding cultural value, and by extension this circuit of cultural production, works, that we can take advantage of it in our own terms. Does everybody understand the point I'm making? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes
Yes.
Yeah. But then there's a third level that we need to kind of contemplate. And this is especially important because in our discussions, I believe we have a lecture on it, and especially for those of us who have to teach cultural and creative entrepreneurship. Understanding that circuit of cultural production and the idea of cultural value in particular is what helps us to have a wider perspective on the management and the operation of that process. In other words, why is it that some arts and culture are produced in particular forms and why some are not? And of course, why the governance structures are the way they are, which is the example we had before. Let me give an example of the first one. Why the arts and culture are produced in particular forms and why some are not. This year for Carnival, a particular artist, soca artist, long-standing, produced his usual event for Carnival that usually has what looks like to me about 500,000 people. And this time it was his wedding. And as a matter of fact, the wedding extended into a week and some. You see, that clearly is a way in which one saw cultural value being extended into soca, where it became commodified now beyond the realm of the traditional framework of carnival. Is it safe to say that that was just a carnival fete class? Where everybody gone?
That
Where
for
everybody
me, that
gone? Everybody get quiet. What happened?
for
Okay, so
me that
everybody,
was
we're all Masha Montano fans?
that was an innovative production. I saw it as killing about 10 birds with one stone
Yes,
because
yes.
it
Can the
was
people I say yes?
because it was he said it's his last concert. While we this year, well, a lot of things have cancelled. I have this feeling that there's going to be another Marshall Monday and I'll be on stage performing again. But I just get a vibe. Probably want to have
Well,
another one at some
chances are
point in time.
because of what has happened. But just for a moment, revisit what I have here. It allows for a wider perspective. If we understand cultural value, it allows us for a wider perspective on the management operation of that process. So
Mhm.
here's the artist. He already knows that you, when I say you, we local Trinidad and Tobago, we have a certain um, level of cultural value for what he does, but he knows that that level is heightened for the diaspora, not so? The diaspora that comes every year for Carnival. Do you not think that is why in the first place it's on the Monday? As a matter of fact, that being there probably would have encouraged people to come a little earlier. They probably were accustomed coming from the Tuesday or the Wednesday, but he on the Monday, so they try to come out the Saturday or the Sunday because they want to catch this Marshall Monday. But then now, here it is. We are accustomed to this event being the way it is. Understanding cultural value, understanding that there are layers within there. Here it is that, as Padrian said, killing several birds with one stone. And so you saw inside there quite possibly people being there for different reasons, different cultural value characteristics. Some people like a good love story, those would have been there. Some people love the soca, they would have been there. Some people just love Masha Montano, and all of them could really be for varied reasons. It is also important to remember that this particular artist now is not a spring chicken. There's a different kind of soca that is now out there besides what he sings. And so for those who would have grown up with him, they probably see that now as the real soca. I don't know if you all have ever heard those arguments now, but it's be a little funny to me because when he would have been a young artist, there would have been people saying that is not soca. What is that? Antonio, is there something you want to say or your hand just happens to be up? Okay,
Sorry, my hand was just.
no problem. So I'm saying to you by just using that example that when one understands cultural value, you get to look at things that have been commodified around us or are offered as commodified versions of the arts and culture and see how it is they arrive at doing these things and why. Another prolific example out of the carnival would be Tribe. How many bands Tribe have? About how many?
Too many.
About 6.
Tonya,
About 6.
too many. If too many was a number on 100, right?
Yeah.
About 6. Oh shucks, Roxanne said lost count. And are they all for the same market?
Nope, each is for a distinct market.
And why is that? Does anybody know that story? Why is that? How did they arrive there? Tonya.
Well, I don't know if there was an actual story, but I just assume because you want to be able to, well, they want to be able to quote unquote cater to different markets, and they don't want the same groups being able to intermingle in one, band, because that reduces the amount of bands that they could have any more money to make, essentially.
Well, that in of itself is a story, I suppose. Thank you, Kevin.
I would say that is a prime example of what is commodification. You segment like that because it's basically market segmentation they did, because they cater for different groups, so they're making 6 times the money they would have made instead of keeping one large tribe. So they've commodified the carnival.
Right. So based on what you and Tonya are saying, I'm showing you that when you understand the idea of cultural value, that idea of market segmentation, which comes out of marketing and marketing management, it helps you to understand that aspect of management that operates in the arts and cultural ecosystem. So the story is that it's somewhat like what Tonya is saying, that and it plays on the name tribe. So we have all these different tribes, and these different tribes have different interests. And the band is so big, we've reached a place where we can branch off and allow these tribes to do as they want on their own terms. And if you look at the various bands, one would note chances are that the decisions, the choices to go to Lost Tribe, vis-a-vis to go Normal Tribe, vis-a-vis to go Bliss, vis-a-vis to go Hearts, vis-a-vis to go Rogue, chances are they differ among the quote-unquote tribes. Would you not agree? And so these kinds of examples show us the way in which, these management decisions, so to speak, are made towards the production of culture in particular contexts. One can certainly see this also with Jamaica Carnival, in the way in which that has been put out with no apologies as a commodified version of Carnival. And I suppose no apologies because that's not their main culture. Their culture is reggae and dancehall, right? But one can see it certainly taking place there. The person who goes to Jamaica Carnival is more than likely someone who does not necessarily have the value for Carnival that others who, as we were talking about in terms of Carnival being heritage and part of our identity, etc., their chances are will have no pleasure in consuming a Jamaica Carnival. Do you understand what I'm saying, class? Does that make sense?
Yes, Miss.
Yep.
I wanted to share, as you said that, Miss.
Yes.
I was talking to someone recently during the carnival, and they were talking about, well, this person is a Trini, so he will come home for carnival every year, but he was talking comparatively about going to Jamaica Carnival, and the experience that they're selling is unlike anything that he would have experienced returning to Trinidad. So from the time they reach in the airport is parades and costumes and all of those things, and they stay in 5-star resorts and they get the same artists, etc., but they're paying much less than if they come to Trinidad Carnival.
Very true. Because
So
I've been. Very
sorry.
true. And that is an angle which we will come back. Don't forget that point, Roxanne, because we'll revisit that as an example And of course, we'll take examples from the others as well. When we come and we look at what Throsby has to say about that idea of cultural value. But that is very true. And sometimes that's an important part of commodification, because if it's cheaper, wouldn't it spread faster? Everybody. If it's cheaper, isn't it possible that what is being commodified would spread faster, that it would go more widespread? At least certainly within the market that it's trying to appeal to. And so this is why sometimes those who are of the diaspora, even if they're second and third generation, they'll happily go to Jamaica if they can't come to Trinidad. We did hear that last year when we were there, people from Trinidad saying that it cost them half or sometimes even a third of what they would spend to come to Trinidad Carnival. So they just come to Jamaica, it's right there. And of course, as they say, they're getting the same artists and what on and of course they get in dancehall too. So for them, it would be considered a win-win. Yes, Patria. One more comment before we change this slide. Go ahead.
It's similar to what you just said. Cheaper for me equals being more accessible, and then it is equals opening to a wider audience. So you could actually bring two different parties or two different audiences together in one band. It actually it creates diversity too. So that cheaper actually creates diversity too.
Yes, agreed, 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 agreed. So the thing is, this is just for your understanding, especially as we would have carried the discussion and recognized that cultural value is very much important to how the business of culture operates, that you would have a sense of the background theoretical context. So the idea of cultural value really came out of several theories and techniques for how one would go about comparing national cultures. And because of that, one has seen a range of theories coming out of the social sciences in particular. And within our neck of the woods, in terms of anthropology and ethnography, one has seen where cultural value is still located in this idea of ideals upon which an entire community would exist. It somewhat draws on the basic general definition of culture. It's the core principles and values for an entire community. And and certainly if one goes back to the point that Ava made last week when we were talking about culture, that may not necessarily be true, because someone may be existing within a community and of course those principles and ideals may not be theirs. So that anthropological ethnographic idea of cultural value is one that we can certainly deconstruct and ask ourselves, if is that simply enough as a guiding perspective to help us to understand commodification and certainly arts, culture in relation to society, particularly in the context of the economics of culture. James, you're not seeing the slides. Are you seeing it now?
No, I'm not sure. I was seeing it earlier, but not anymore.
Is everyone seeing the slide or you're not? Let's see. I think it dropped out just now. Well, I'm going to reload it just in case. I'm going to reload it. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, miss.
James,
Yeah.
Someone had the same problem last week, so it might be something with my account.
Okay. But you can go out and come back in.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So everybody remembers the last point I just made there? So I'm saying that the anthropologic, ethnographic idea of cultural value, where they say, cultural value are the core principles and ideals upon which an entire community exists, and they cite these factors as what makes up cultural value. The question is, how far can that carry us to really understanding the idea of the commodification of culture and how it is that the arts and culture connect with society beyond the aesthetic. To me, that idea still limits us and does not allow us to see the realm of which commodification occurs. And we just discussed about 3 levels of commodification from one example alone. And it certainly does not allow us to give full understanding and appreciation for how arts and culture can have socioeconomic impacts on society, right? And so the definition or Throsby's perspective on cultural value, to my mind, holds greater credence in that regard, right? He argues that it is not just simply about money in the first instance, that money is not the only reason why someone would choose to purchase arts and culture or why the producer may choose to commodify. Money will be one of the key factors. But here his argument is that we don't just consume our choice of arts and culture because of money or because of economic value. But he says that there are a series of other values that underpin that. Let's see if it will come up. I feel as if something is missing from this slide. Right? And this book that my apologies, this book here is the core text in terms of Throsby's articulation of economics and culture. I don't know if I've placed that in your file as yet. I'll check back and see. I believe I have a PDF of the entire book, but I know I have scanned some chapters, and so I will happily place them there for you, the ones that I definitely want you to read into. This is a book, I'm not sure if it's available but you can check. It is certainly one that you should have in your collection. When you get the chance, you should try and purchase a copy. Because Throsby really takes his time to carry us through some of the arguments, the theories, before he carries us into some of the real examples of what goes on in the global cultural economy. And so for me, Throsby's theory of cultural value is perhaps one of the more holistic efforts towards understanding how commodification operates and why it operates. So let's just take a moment and look at what he says in terms of that argument. So he argues that if we are truly to understand commodification, we've got to create models for valuing and evaluating culture beyond strict economic terms. Why do you think that's important? Why do you think it would be important that we create models for valuing and evaluating culture beyond strict economic terms? Value here, region is money based, not cultural based.
Is it so that the heritage can be maintained? Because if we're talking about commodifying our cultural practices, and then that may run the risk of mass production and catering to a certain audience, then if you create models for valuing culture beyond those economic terms, then that's a way for you to maintain your cultural identity without sacrificing, the things that are important to you as a people.
Yes, that's good, Ava. Right. So remember, we already acknowledged quite sadly that government structures tend not to value the arts and culture in the way that we wish them to. So if we had to take on board Throsby's point there, we could give them a gift of Throsby, because it means then that in their understanding of culture beyond strict economic terms, perhaps it's so ironic, it's like a reverse thing. Perhaps then they would see the need to invest in it in a more broad-based way that would actually yield the economic returns. You get what I'm saying, class? So it's quite ironic, because Throsby is saying that the idea of the economics of culture is not, it's not one-sided then. It's not one track, but it certainly is a context where it's dynamic and that the idea of value can come from different angles. Is it Patria want to say something? No, Kelly. Kelly, were you going to say something, or I can go again?
Yeah, I think she covered it. I was supposing that the importance of it is really to educate those that really don't understand how to value it. If you give them a model on how to value culture,
Yeah.
it makes it easier for them to appreciate.
But it's also important too, and I want you all to note this as well. It's also important too for us who are producers of culture, that if we understand cultural value beyond strict economic terms, it means that we can see our products and services in more dynamic ways, and that we wouldn't necessarily pursue one market segment or one market niche. That we could see then that people can have a range of values for the one thing that we're offering, which is kind of like what Masha Montano did. And it's something that you see um, occur. I always say my basic example of this is the boat ride, believe it or not. Because somebody would have a boat ride, and most times it's not one person that will do it. And if it's one person, he has a committee. And each one of those persons will tap into a different market segment. And so this one boat ride, and let's say it's the harbor master, which probably holds about 800 people or something, so I think it is. That one boat ride can be filled now because there are these different persons who are pursuing or who are involved in various segments of the market, who will all bring these persons to the same space. So that is an example of why is it we need also, as producers of culture and as persons who are putting culture in whatever form for sale on the market, to appreciate the idea of cultural value and know how to manipulate it then in a way that can be towards our own sustainability. Any comments or questions about that? Kwazi, I saw your hand up before. We can go again.
Oh no, I was a little, yeah. In terms of I was gonna ask if we could see um when you're speaking about Cambly rights and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is if this theory is being practiced right now in Trinidad in terms of with carnival,
Mm-hmm.
seeing that do place, as we say, finance money value to, like we say, Cambly rights, Dragon Festival, um the shows that happen on the avenue from individual competitions. So I don't. So maybe the NCC is practicing this said theory. I don't know. Maybe it is being practiced. I don't say I don't know. I don't know if it's by fault or you understand.
You kind of
If
happen.
it's being
I
practiced,
think
if it all
I
just happened just so.
I think I think that some entities do practice. I don't know if they're, well, yes, probably do, because if you understand marketing, you might you might recognize, especially if you go through the door of market segmentation, as Kevin mentioned earlier. But I can't say that our institutions that are charged with facilitating the delivery of the arts and culture, particularly in the context of carnival, I'm not sure if they quite understand that. I don't think I am, because if they did, I feel that the budget for the arts and culture would be bigger, because you would say to yourself, well, based on the cultural value framework and characteristics, we need to put more money here because we have to satisfy this, and this. So I'm not sure, to be honest. I know for the old yard, I certainly take that on board because I can look in the space, as small as it is, and see the pockets of market. And I mean, I've written a paper on it now, soon to be published, where I talk about why people are there in terms of heritage. What are the aspects of heritage that they are taking from the yard? and that they are in turn giving, because when you come into the yard and you interact, you yourself become a heritage maker. But everyone is not there for the same reason, you see. So that I believe it's something that's quite useful to take on board. I can see where the idea of money can cloud us, because we would think, and persons do think, that true business people, that if it's about money, that all they have to do is to concern themselves with money. But Throsby is an economist, and I agree with him. I think if one intends to be profitable and sustainable, then it really can't just be about the economic side of it. When I look at examples like community-based initiatives, though, that are going from strength to strength, like there's this community, I'm not sure if that's Southeast, or I'm not sure. They have a cocoa festival, and they they have a cocoa festival, and they produce cocoa in the community, and they do tours and all of that. I always mix it up. Is it Palo Seco or Brasso Seco? Is it Palo or Brasso?
Brasso. It's Brasso Seco.
Nice. That is an example of where there is a sense of the range of cultural values, even if they don't understand all, because they clearly even hark back to Williams's early rendition of what is culture, because it's agriculture there. It's culture in terms of a developed state of mind. There are quite a few things going on there. And by extension, one can see where the cultural value characteristics, which we're going to meet shortly, it's varied there. And their appeal to the market isn't just lodged in terms of economic returns. And my argument is that if you don't lodge it only in terms of the economic, chances are you're going to be a lot more sustainable, because then you have a broader base upon which to push forward. Does that make sense, class?
Yes.
Yes, miss.
So let us take a look now at Throsby's cultural value characteristics. So if you can see, he has at the top there aesthetic. So Throsby does not discount aesthetic. In other words, what Throsby is arguing is that people consume the arts and culture for one or somewhere for these 6 characteristics here. Maybe one, maybe 2, maybe all. And he is also arguing that this is what helps us then to understand the production of culture, because it is driven then by the fact that there are people who will want to be supplied commodified cultural goods and services for any one of these. So the aesthetic, we know that one. So it looks nice, it feels good. Okay, what do you think authenticity is? What would be an example of authenticity being a cultural value? What cultural good or service would someone consume because it's authentic? Like what? Or purchase because it's authentic? What's a good example of that? Yes, Tonya.
Food. Food that's like specifically like made with it follows a specific recipe, it uses specific ingredients, and it like has this sense of authentic, genuine value, because it's made exactly the way it should be made, in a sense.
I suppose. Can you give me a real life example?
I mean, like when I was in New York, like I used to study in New York, so like one of the things you always want, like authentic, like roti, or like if you want authentic doubles, you might go some places and it's like, this is not a doubles, this is so you would search for like a place that has authentic food that reminds you and like feels culturally connected to where you come from, because it follows that specific, and like it captures, that essence of like being home, essentially.
Okay, yes, Janae?
Miss, I'm not sure if this will fall in that category, but like the steel pan. Some persons, some we might prefer to actually buy the original version of the steel pan as opposed to the electronic versions that they have
Yes.
right now.
Yes, that is a perfect example. And I am assuming possibly that the original steel pan may be very expensive.
No, it's affordable.
Affordable now. Okay. Patreon. Yes, tell me.
Yes, I can't remember who spoke about food, but it just reminded me of Angostura bitters. Because it's authentic, it's indigenous to here. While we mentioned it in another class, and I actually checked, there are other forms of bitters, but those bitters are actually bitter, as opposed to our Angostura bitters but it gives a
flavorful.
Yeah, it gives a flavor to everything, and it's something that nobody could replicate because it's trademarked and copyrighted from here.
Yes.
Yeah, that my mind just went on that and doubles as well.
Yes. So that persons would not dare purchase bitters besides the Angostura bitters. They will wait till they come to Trinidad, or they will wait till they see it. Chances are, if they're living abroad and they see it, it may very well cost more than if they had to get it here, because of course here is really the only place you could truly get it from. Are there yes, Jillian?
What I was thinking is that a good example for me, it kind of brings me back to the Tobago Heritage Festival, in the sense where it is commodified because it tends to highlight practices that would have been a home thing, a family, was like a way of life then.
Yes.
So it would have done in your private homes, etc. But now it's been put on the stage for a kind of exhibit purpose, so it's more or less commodified. And it is done really to maintain the rituals that were practiced then, and also to bring the authenticity of the event to life.
Yes, yes.
So it offers both commodification and value, but not value as it relates to money value, but value more to the persons, to the Tobagonian themselves.
Yes. And when one looks at festivals, you see that happening a lot, where they carry it a step further though, where there is the impetus to seek that balance. I believe it was James who mentioned balance before, where they seek to maintain and I suppose that's like what Kelly was saying earlier. Yes, I want the commodification, but I don't want to lose what is sacred or what is real. And so there are persons who will consume aspects of arts and culture, and you see it in heritage because it's authentic. And because it's authentic, they're willing to pay, it does not matter what, to be able to consume and to access that. So it's like the Saturday when you have the pan finals, that is a hot ticket item, isn't it? Is that, I remember that ticket used to be about $800 or $900 a pop, you know. So that is considered the real thing, because that's the giants, that's the king of kings there, you see. And there are numerous examples. I know one of my favorite global examples is the craft of what you call the Canadian, the Inuit craft. I don't know if you're familiar with American Indians and Canadian Indians, the Sioux culture then. And if you've traveled north, going through those airports in the US, you will notice that in every major airport in the US, you see one of those shops. Have you all ever seen that? Have you ever ventured in one of those? Where you see that American Indian culture on sale. Yes, Jamie, Patrian.
Yes, I saw it as well. I also saw when I was in Texas in 2008. I think it was probably because we were so close to the Mexican border. There were also these shops with these Inca, sorry, Aztec like
yes,
mats and all of these handicraft, and they had like it was something that it was actually very prominent in the south parts of America.
And sometimes it could be very expensive. In the case of the Canadian example, because of Canada, so you see how we're going to connect it now in terms of what we were saying. Because of the government of Canada's intent to have developed the arts and culture ecosystem, that it would contribute to Canada's development, they would have created a cultural policy that protected the arts and culture. It is because of Canada's cultural policy that we have a Drake and what's this, a Celine Dion, and all of these that are now multi-platinum recording artists. It's because of the framework that they had put in place. But within that framework, special attention was also given to heritage, especially as it related to the indigenous peoples. Now, Canadian Indians were always producing their items for sale. But what the cultural policy framework did was to legitimize what they were doing. And every single item that is produced by their communities, it's what would you call that? It's labeled, and it's licensed, it's given a number and all of this. And so when you purchase that, you get the certificate that goes with it. So that avoid counterfeiting and stuff like that. And of course, one would well imagine that's very expensive, because you get in as what we would consider a one of a kind or one of a few. Yes, Jamie.
Yeah, I just want to add that fact that it's labeled and you get a certificate of authenticity is
Yes.
protected in IP laws under traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions as well.
Right. That's
Yeah,
what it is.
it goes even further than just what we see.
So there are people who will purchase that and who will consume that. It's commodified in the sense that it's not tacky looking. It's well placed in your home. It's properly marketed. It follows all of the production of culture circuit, right? It does it all. It's produced. It's manufactured. It's marketed and disseminated by placing it in these shops. And when you go to a dealer and you purchase, you get this certificate of authenticity. And of course, having had that, you are, of course, purchasing something of a particular price range. And there are people who are willing to do this. We see this a lot in the visual arts world as well, where, of course, there are persons who would prefer to purchase the original as opposed to purchasing the print. So authenticity. We also see it in the fashion world, where you would prefer to wear a particular designer as opposed to just going down the road and purchasing a print. You rather buy it from Lush Kingdom, for example, because then in your mind it is authentic, as opposed to going down the road and purchasing some fabric from I don't know, give me a fabric or Fabric Land, and you're making up your same thing. So the idea of authenticity resides in people having value for the cultural good and service because it's authentic and willing to pay whatever. What about historical? What do you think would be historical value? What is that? How would that relate to James? What would that relate to in terms of a commodified good or service? Historical value. What might we be consuming? Anybody? Everybody sleeping on me today? What's going on? Yes, Patria, tell me. Today's a thinking class day.
I'm thinking information knowledge in the aspect of books, because it is of historical value, because there are some things that are indigenous to a specific place like Trinidad and Tobago. We may have things of historical value that you could only find here. For example, this book by Molly Ai that actually documents 80% of the dance forms of Trinidad and Tobago is now out of print. It's being sold on Amazon by someone for $600 US.
There you go. They buy it yesterday.
Mm, and yeah, that's the last price I saw for one. I'm like, what? And the only copies that they have is either in a reference library. If somebody who has a copy locally, they don't actually lend it out. And yeah, that's something that when you said historical value, that's the first thing that came to mind, something like that.
That's one. That's one end of the spectrum. Yes, Quasi. Let's see if we get another one.
Um, I think, but for Trinidad, I think the emancipation celebration is of historical significance.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Because and that is another good example. Does everyone in Trinidad and Tobago go to emancipation celebrations? Do they go to the village and purchase the foods and
Everyone
whatnot?
goes.
Right. So we have learned another thing about Throsby's model or we've learned another thing about cultural value that Throsby's model helps us to see, which is that what may be of value to me may not be of value to you, even though it may be free or of very little cost. Yes, we understand when it is of such intrinsic value to you that you will pay 600 US as in the case of the book. But what Throsby's model also shows us is that cultural value is also tied to certain emotions where it is not a matter now, it's not about expensive now, it is just about my choice and my taste and my interest. And so you will find a lot of the examples with regard to historical value tend to reside there because historical also goes along, as you would well imagine, with heritage. So someone wanting, so for example, I have never gotten up, I confess true confession, I have never gotten up to see the Cambule. Can't get my eye open, kill me dead. But my mother who comes from Barbados every year for carnival, she gets up and she goes. Because she continues to be fascinated by how this story is told, because of course, that is not the experience in Barbados. So that is an example of historical value. But you see, it still comes back to there being some kind of transaction. No money is passed, but she gets up her time. And how does she reach? Some gas has to be spent to get there. Chances are you're going to buy something to eat, and so on and so forth. So an economic transaction is still going on account of that Cambule. Right. Everybody gets that example? Is there another one we can think of in terms of historical? One more.
What about built heritage?
That's
Like our
right.
building.
Thank you very much, Eva. Yes, built heritage. Like, for example, and this one kind of goes, it bridges between historical and symbolic. There are people who want to go Scotland and they want to go and see that area there where they shot Game of Thrones. You know that, right? The people who go there is just as you see it in the movie, all them rock and thing is man want to go there and watch them all rock. Serious thing. No disrespect. So you see, that is their value. And of course it's like, wow, this is where they shot J. Game of Thrones. Oh, but this is the stone that this one was on, and da da da. You see? So that is a historical bridging on symbolic. Yes, so built heritage. And that is where the old yard falls as well. That is why we recreate the setting to the barrack yard, because we know there are people who appreciate being in that kind of a milieu because it carries them back. And also important to note, within there is also intangible heritage in terms of reenactments. So like in Canada, there's something called Black Creek Village. And when you go there, they live in the time of Quaker. People are living there and they make their own cheese and their butter and their maple leaf. That is how they live day to day, dressed in the clothes, and the children are going to school right there, following the traditional old principles and the slate and the this and so on and so forth. So there are people who actually do what we call the lived experience. And of course, those who consume that, who pay to go and see that, that is, of course, because they appreciate history, having that historical value for the commodified aspect of the arts and culture. Very good. Let us touch on symbolic as we started to harp there when we looked at the example of the Game of Thrones. What might symbolic cultural value be? What else besides the Game of Thrones?
I can think of an example from South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, boy band now. What's the name? BTS.
Yes. Lord of mercy. I think that's what my poor child in. I'm troubled. This is K-pop, right?
K-pop, that's right. The K-pop industry, yeah.
Yeah, that is what.
That band specifically, South Korea's tourism increased because of them.
Mm-hmm.
People, yeah, started to go. And the band itself has contributed, I think, 3% to the GDP.
Interesting. Look at that.
Tourism and merchandise sales.
I think we all have to get together and try and create some kind of band and make it K-pop. What all you say?
No, it's the model we had to use.
The
We
model,
had to try not to
we have
model.
that. Yes, what?
I wanted to make that example, to use that as an example earlier, because Korea is really good. Korea is a really good example of their commodifying their culture, because in the 1990s, there's something they call it the Hallyu wave, and they basically exported their music and TV shows, and even like their makeup, essentially. They export
Yes.
to the rest of Asia and to the West. And and economists called it the building of their soft power, because they weren't allowed to have.
That's right.
That's right.
Or in terms of industrial power, or
yes,
like have
because in the middle of the
go ahead.
Yes, no. In the middle of the South Korean capital, they are the historical palaces that they've kept up to shape. Tourist draw, and the same group I was talking about just last week, they took over what they call Jimmy Fallon show, and they is there with the backdrop, so it's things like that they've been exporting to the world bit by bit.
Yeah. James says we have S-pop. Is that
S-pop, soca?
And what I've often found about the symbolic cultural value characteristic is that it is the one for me. I mean, all do, but with this one, even as you were discussing there, we see it with soca as well, it always leads to a residual. And when I say a residual, it redounds then in other aspects, because out of that whole K-pop thing, my daughter, she tries to learn Japanese. I heard she sings Korean music. She told me that day she want to visit there. She asked me if she could go to school there. Look now. And I'm sure there are many other young people that have that sensibility and probably are doing it. And of course now that is generating new economic returns for them. That is making their society more sustainable. The way in which the commodity is being approached in terms of establishing symbolic cultural value. Yes, Jamie.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that, because I bought my own silver chopsticks and spoons. I've always liked chopsticks and eating with them, and I've been involved in a lot of the Chinese cultural exchanges, etc. So I already had that exposure. But when I got introduced to the Korean side of it, I don't know, I just wanted to go into it more. I'm giving myself as an example, and I went. I started to look at the cultural industries, how they started to build it up, and then I discovered the K dramas, and then I discovered K-pop. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a whole this is a wormhole. You can go to
interesting.
And yes, it made me want to go to South Korea recently, because I'm like, why? I'm waiting for COVID to finish to make my trip.
Well, you could take Gabby with you. But this is very interesting, because you talked about chopsticks. I forgot about that. Anytime we buy Chinese food, she doesn't eat with the knife or fork. It's chopsticks she eating it, and she eating it out of a bowl. I said, well, boy, I don't know now what happened here.
And ramen.
Yes, it's an amazing thing.
It is amazing. It's amazing.
I would also say as well, what falls here to my mind is the cosplay. The cosplay movement also falls in that idea of symbolic.
Yes. And Japanese
cultural value characteristic, because when we see that movement, people do go to some extremes. some of them recreate themselves in some ways and live out their characters. We are aware of this, right? So that for us, we might consider that, yo, they're crazy. But for them, they have symbolic cultural value for this. And it is tied in with their identity in a sense. And that's why it's so important for us to visit cultural identity. I believe that maybe next week's class, you know. And we see that even in the Caribbean in terms of how people, we know there are people who are not of African descent, who are Rastafari. That's symbolic cultural value characteristic there at play.
Like,
Sorry.
how these, I was saying that it's kind of like how Adele decided to wear Bantu nuts and a Jamaican print
Lord, yes,
in
Lord,
for carnival.
Lord,
So
Lord, yes, Lord.
she was symbolizing something. So, well, that was her vision, her idea.
Yes, and she gets some little power
Yeah.
out there, boy. Wow. But it is that. It is that. And so, you know, it's funny you should mention that because that was going to be my small point of discussion question there as to how far do you think we as producers of culture should go with promoting symbolic cultural value characteristic? Is there a way in which the line can be crossed, or is it really all okay? Especially in light of what Eva just mentioned in terms of Adele. What do you all think?
If, to bring it even further home, there's also the example of when Kamala went to, whose funeral was it? Some South African funeral, and she wore a head wrap, and Trinidadians were
Would have
sort
been
of,
was it Mandela's funeral she went for?
was it Mandela?
Yeah, it was Mandela.
Yeah.
She was wearing an African head wrap, and people felt that was inappropriate in a sense.
But
So
was
I
it not appropriate? Was she not doing the correct thing in terms of protocol or no? I don't know. Anybody here know? Jimmy, no?
My opinion is that I don't think it was appropriate.
Okay.
No, I think she was. She was in. She wasn't against protocol.
Okay.
She went. Yeah. No, she wasn't. But yeah, a lot of people thought that as our head of state at the time. I think she was. Was she?
Yes.
Yes. She was.
She was.
She was not head of state as our prime minister. Sorry.
Yeah.
And didn't need to, but.
Right.
I don't.
That's very interesting, but that is symbolic. But all of these things, you know, again, it really points to the question of how far do you go as a producer, because we have to look at it at both ends. We are understanding the framework not only from the standpoint of why people consume what they consume, but it's also from the standpoint of being producers of culture as to why producers of culture would do what they do in terms of the market choices. Let's look at spiritual. I think spiritual is relatively easy. Spiritual value. Are there aspects of the arts and culture that are commodified because people may have spiritual value towards it? Where do we see that in our own context, for example? I can think of it globally. Yes, Eva?
My context was going to be Asian again.
And that's where. That's
so
it.
what they do is that they charge admission to their temples.
Oh, interesting. Right. Say no more. Okay. Yeah. Rosaries. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Roxanne said rosaries. Well, I think the entire Catholic faith, no disrespect, from going to see the Pope right down to the pilgrimage.
Like monks in Benedict.
Yep. All the pilgrimages is.
They sell their
tourism. Yeah, it's tourism. Yes, Esther.
So I think the example I have it in terms of religion on or spirituality on that front is similar to the Cambodia riots in terms of there not being a monetary exchange between the audience and the persons putting on the event, but you could look at Jose celebrations in St. James the same way.
Yes. As a matter of fact, quite a few of the Hindu festivals and the Orisha festivals as well. There are people who come.
Well, I was actually going to say that with Ram Leela is one where it's heavily monetized.
Yes.
Because it's a Hindu event, and every single thing about about a Ram Leela festival or visiting a Ram Leela site, it comes at a cost, from the food that they sell to all of the items and the trinkets and the glow stuff. So that is, so
Day of
those
the
are
Dead,
two
yes.
examples
True.
of,
The Day of the Dead is
yeah.
a big deal. Yes, yes, yes. Very true. Yes, and this now can sometimes border the symbolic as well in the context of communities. If the community then is the seat of the spiritual happening or ritual, so that there's a symbolic then mixed in there with the spiritual cultural value, and the person is going there because they said this is real, this is where it happens the best or the most real, or this is really what it is, and therefore I need to leave my country and come here. There are people who come here for the Wali. They prefer to come here. There are those who prefer to go to Guyana as opposed to here, and vice versa. I'm seeing Jamie saying yes, every year the India High Commission brings a contingent for cultural exchange, especially around the Wali. Yes, yes, this is very true. Yes, so that people again will consume, and there are aspects of certain religions and certain spiritual traditions that have become commodified on account of the value that persons would have. For historical, I forgot to mention my favorite example of my own experience going to the Dominican Republic. The first time I went, and there's a part in Santo Domingo. I don't know if it's old Santo Domingo. I can't remember what they call it, but it definitely was an old part of the capital. And along there, it has basically been allowed to remain the same. The streets are cobbled. There are these small, different little houses, and apparently, this would have been the part of the Dominican Republic. Well, it would have been Santo Domingo then, where Columbus and they would have arrived. And it's so interesting. Obviously, I'm not really a Columbus fan, but there I was drawn into this thing. And most of those establishments are two-story, and at the bottom is a shop, and upstairs, some of them, you could tour it. And of course, the narrative is this is where Ovando or Christopher Columbus lay his head. And depending on whatever downstairs, they will be selling these different artifacts. These, I remember these bottles, and they said, well, these are the bottles that they drank out of. I buy a bottle. So the fact of the matter is, historical is like, oh, really? You remember learning this in history? You're this, you're that. And so what then comes tied into how heritage becomes commercialized is persons having that historical slash symbolic value for whatever is being put forward as the commodified version of that piece of history. Yes, Jamie, I'm saying Antonia saying Christmas. The idea that it's
Yeah.
not commodified around Jesus, the birth of Jesus.
That's true. Yeah. But Dr. Tull, I was as you were mentioning your experience in Dominica. I remember Barbados itself for the George Washington House.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh
The
yes.
George Washington House and the tunnels, and I actually went through one of the tunnels to the sea.
Yes, these examples are very interesting, class, because we see this juxtaposition. Because Barbados is a place where our first prime minister said that Barbados will be friends of many, satellites of none, and that was the reason he gave for kicking out the U.S. base out of Barbados. That's why we don't have a U.S. base there anymore. Trinidad
Right.
was never bold and brazen to do it like that. But Barbados did, and that is what our first prime minister said. Barbados will be friends of many, satellites of none. And yet,
None.
Barbados proudly presents as part of its heritage product. People pay money to this thing. this George Washington house, which apparently is where dear old George lived, slept.
Yeah, he was there when just before he became president, and his brother was there with him before when some outbreak of either polio or some one of the disease,
Cholera or something.
cholera or something. Yeah, and they were there for a while, and yeah, they have a bed. They have I don't know if it's the actual thing, but they have the bed, his quilt,
And sometimes
the
people have
table.
events there, but they keep the place in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, they do. The 100 year will be more how many 100 years, how many years it is, I can't remember now. But I remember thinking, oh my goodness, it did give us a special a different feel.
It's the same thing with when we had Sam Lord's Castle as a hotel.
Right.
Sam Lord's
Yes.
Castle in Barbados has the same 100 windows as the Buckingham Palace, and one window remains closed out of respect to Buckingham Palace. Because you can't have the two establishments with the windows open. Oh, whatever is the royal protocol. And of course, you would know that majority of guests that stayed there, the market was British and European.
Right.
And so Sam Lord Castle was able to capitalize on that. And that hotel is in St. Philip. That's like, how to explain that to you all for those of you who don't know Barbados? Is not in the neck of the tourist belt.
It's like Toko.
It's yes, thanks. It's like Toko. But it would always be filled for the time that narrative could have worked. Yes, Tonya, and then we will move on again. Tonya, you're gonna say something, or
way back, I think when we were still talking about that spiritual aspect, I think somebody had mentioned Asia, and it made me think of Southeast Asia in particular, and how things like there's been this sort of movement towards, I think, spirituality in the last few years. We've seen this rise of like wellness, but how the wellness like reflects specifically like, quote unquote Eastern cultures. So things like yoga, things like Buddhism, things, and how these Western societies have like adopted them into their own, but how. And so that's example of or the line of questioning you were asking us with, when does commodification become too much, or when does we start to lose it essentially? Because I think the other day I got an ad for like big booty yoga, and I was like, even is that, and it made me think like it goes so far from what it originally was and what it was created for. Yeah. So I think
I know of the how far. I don't know if any of you ever watched that documentary on Netflix when they talked about this yoga guru guy who was in the States, and he I think he's on the run. He ended up for a lot of money. People used to try to be with this guru. Y'all never watch it? Guru something. I can't remember his name, but it's on Netflix. And he apparently was someone who was selling the idea of yoga. He sold the story that he went to India and he learned at the feet of whoever, and he's this guru with yoga and all these intricate steps. And he apparently behind the scenes was abusing a lot of women as well as extorting. And he ended up running away to Mexico. At least I think that's what they said, because they've never caught him. But it was just one entire game. So this is an example of when you go too far, how too far is far with commodification. And we do have various examples of it. Yes, Tonya.
Yeah. So I think that was my.
Oh Lord. Eva asked if we could list Trevor Sears here. Well, I suppose because you're talking about the commodification of herbal treatments and herbal medicines, because it's all based on the idea of the symbolic and the spiritual. And I think you get to a place where, and we see this a lot when we visit places, tourists, you just sometimes there will be someone there applying this thing, and it's so much replicated, you realize it's not the real thing. And then sometimes commodification can be exploitative. Again, my DR experience, I don't know if you all are familiar with Haitian art, but Haitian art is a form of art that is now widely replicated, but you don't get it any and everywhere in the Caribbean. If you are close that side, you will get it. Sometimes I know for a time there was an artist had some pieces on display for sale there at Vinnie Manger. I've seen it once or twice here in small bits, depending on some of the art shops here, depending on what they're selling. But I got my piece on the streets of the DR because they would go over on the border, go over, cross the border to Haiti, and of course, probably buy it for next kin to nothing, and then, of course, come and sell it on the streets of the Dominican Republic. And of course, people would buy it because, well, you're right there, you're on the island itself, you're just not in Haiti. You see, but it would have the thing at the back of it. You will see the symbols and the meaning and the little sign or signature or whatever's at the back of it. There's something there. And that's how you know that that is a piece. The other place you may see them, obviously, is Miami. But then now you know it costs them more. And then sometimes it may not be the real thing. So again, sometimes this thing can be exploited because how much is the person who has made that? How much are they really getting? And sometimes they probably, it may have even been stolen from them because we know of that relationship between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. You see? So we really have to contemplate in our critical assessment when we look at it from the producer side, how far is too far? We really do have to be cognizant of that when we give our discourse in terms of these ideas of cultural value characteristics. And last but not least, social. What do you think the social cultural value characteristic would relate to? Last but not least. Sonia, your hand was up before. Are you going to respond to this one? Oh, social value characteristic. That's the entire British monarchy. Is this to what I'm saying now, social value, or the one before? Because it certainly fits this one. Yes, so the social value characteristic, yes, is where people value things based on status. So they would purchase things because they want to belong. And I would say that for a lot of the um, entertainment, contemporary entertainment fits in there. And you would also, to me, you can use the social value characteristic to explain um, the whole movement of lifestyle goods and services that are often linked to people in the arts and cultural ecosystem, especially those who are entertainers, because they know that if what's his name? If Jay-Z endorses it or he makes it, then those who believe in Jay-Z, they would purchase it. It certainly explains fashion in relation to artists, especially shoes, sneakers, you know, in the US. When a new sneaker comes out, a new Jordans, what happening to the store? Where the line is? All around the block, going and coming from all 3 o'clock in the morning. Not so? Yes, the alcohol industry, yes, when they are tied to particular beverages, especially the high-end beverages, we certainly have seen that in terms of champagne. Champagne has become a big thing for certain people. When they're out, they must be seen buying the champagne and popping the champagne. And of course, if it's embodied in the music, if it's being sung about, that makes it more of a reason towards consumption. All of that is social value. Yes, fetes and carnival bands. Yes, you want to play in tribe as opposed to Trini revelers because you believe that you should be more there. That is your crowd, and that is who seems to look like you or be like you or act like you. That's correct. Apple products, I see somebody say, Ava, I'm on a Mac with my iPhone on my lap. What does that say about Miss? What does that say? People who go to movie town, yes, who prefer, but do we still have normal cinemas though? Or are we now down to the Or are we now down to the movie town kind of structure? No. So that there is another example where sometimes the cultural value characteristic can be so powerful that the market can then shift and make things obsolete. Do we see that? Do we have other examples where culture, I'm a text now, oh Lord. Do we have other examples where the cultural value characteristic has created or made the product so pervasive that it has made something else obsolete? So we just had the example of the movie town kind of construct, and we don't have normal cinemas anymore. Are there any other examples where the cultural value characteristic has aided the pervasive nature of the commodified good and service, and it has made something else obsolete? Anyone? Everybody like they gone home? All-inclusive carnival experience. That has pushed out what? What has that pushed out? Kelly? Yes?
Fire fat and
Roxanne was speaking, or Kelly? Wasan fire fats, correct. Correct. And even, and yes, inclusive juve bars have now pushed out what for all intents and purposes was supposed to be the normal average juve ban. And what this does sometimes, so we've noted another point, what this has taught us is that sometimes it also disrupts the ecosystem, would you not say? Because in the context of carnival, this is what has disrupted the ecosystem of Port of Spain, carnival on the road. Who do we see on the road when we play mass in these bands? We don't see the vendors and whatnot like before. And this is also because of the tradition where, I shouldn't say because of the tradition, it is exacerbated or aided in a sense because of your age-long tradition of you can roam wherever. So there's no set route. Whereas in Barbados now, even though we have all-inclusive events, all-inclusive bans, sorry, we have a case where because it's a set route, you still see multiples of people on the road, and people will still come out there ban and consume because maybe they have a relationship with whoever they see and they custom seeing them every year and so on and so forth. I'm seeing traditional versus pretty mass. Yes, so we see more of the pretty mass on the streets, and it has somewhat sidelined the traditional mass to being relegated now to showcase on particular nights or by the square or particular segments of the day of mass and so on. All of those are correct examples. Thank you very much. So I think that we clearly understand what Throsby was arguing when he talked about we having to dig deep beyond looking at value in strict economic terms. When I post, you can certainly take a look at his brief interview where he talks about value in culture in that regard. And it's really based on when he would have launched this particular book, Beyond Culture. So you can take a look at that in your time. So all of what we just discussed in terms of cultural value is for the most part a positive idea, or clearly as a somewhat acceptable notion of how culture should be viewed in the context of cultural industry and commodification. But not everyone really believed that culture should be viewed as having so many values. These two gentlemen that you see here on your screen, Adorno and Horkheimer, leading theorists in the Frankfurt School, had a different view about culture. They came up in a time when the arts and culture were consumed primarily through live performance. And through live performance, where, of course, where society was demarcated by socio-economic barriers. So the elite would go to the concert hall to watch a show, to watch music performed. And of course, those who are not in the elite bracket, who would have been the poor class, would of course find themselves in a kind of setting that was reminiscent of when Shakespeare first started. You know, they used to say when Shakespeare first started in the Globe Theatre, it wasn't elite at all. And of course, it used to be a kind of rowdy kind of display of the play. And so these two gentlemen had a problem with culture being seen as something of value beyond the aesthetic. For them, there are really 2 points. And in the dialectic of enlightenment, and you can click on it here when you get the slides, you can take the reading from there. They see culture being commodified as creating a false system, a false consciousness that is deliberately being constructed by the elite to their benefit. So, in other words, they see anything to do with the commodification of culture not about the advancement of culture or society, but just as another way of the ruling class to make money. And so for them, any transformation within culture that has happened on account of the elite or the capitalist system that we were talking about not too long ago that we mentioned, they see that as having a negative impact. And because they saw it as having a negative impact, they decided that, okay, so culture then is not for its pure aesthetic purpose. This is now the culture industry. And so Adorno and Horkheimer actually created that term out of disdain for what they saw happening in the cultural industries, in culture, sorry, in the arts and culture. Your comments. So do you mean who determines art to be art? Okay, let's take a moment here. Let's take a 5-minute break. I think this is a good place to pause, and we will come back and reconvene with Kelly's question. Okay, class, are we ready again?
I'm here.
Yes, okay. Can everyone just say when they've logged in?
I'm here too.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm here.
Dominique is here, right? Esther, Roxanne, Patrian, Kelly. Julian is here. Esther's here.
I'm back.
Jamie's here. Roxanne? Yes,
I'm
Roxanne is
here.
here. Patrian. Okay, great. So let's go. So as I was just sharing with you, we are looking somewhat at the flip side of what we were discussing before, where we are now being introduced to this theory by Adorno and Horkheimer. These two gentlemen who did not believe that culture should be viewed as anything but for its aesthetic purposes. And anything that tried to put culture beyond that, they saw that as an attempt to commodify for the purposes of the elite only. Now, it's ironic because they themselves were the elite, eh? But there were the kinds who were of the purest nature. Do we know of artists who believe that, I see Kelly have it here, who believe that one should be making art for art's sake? Do we still have those? I'm not telling you to call anybody's name. I'm just asking. Are we aware or are we familiar with persons having that perspective of art for art's sake and therefore it should not be commodified in any way? Anyone? No? We don't know anybody like that again? I could think of a few. Yes, Kelly. Yes. And so Adorno and Horkheimer were of a similar view. And because they were so disgusted by what they were seeing happening in arts and culture, they said, but this is not art anymore. This is a culture industry. And that is how the term culture industry was born. Now, let me give you a little idea of what the context was at that time. So, how did people first listen or how did people first consume music? Do you have any idea? How did that start? Prior to there being a music industry, how did people consume music? Nobody knows? We don't have any musicians here. Yes, Patrian?
Like it depends on how far back we go in.
How it started before it was an industry. I'm seeing Jimmy saying live shows and recitals. What were you going to say? Same or different?
Within communities, then it depends on the region. It could be within tribes, within basically within communities, within them.
But it was what, live or what? How was it?
It was live because a lot of them held a certain significance, whether it be for ritualistic significance or spiritual significance, or as a rite of passage.
Enjoyment.
Yeah, or for enjoyment.
Yeah. Enjoyment. So live in person, correct.
Mm-hmm.
So at Adorno and Horkheimer's time, that is what they would have known. But something happened at that time that would have urged them to write these series of writings that they wrote then, criticizing what they were seeing happening, that they said was the commodification of art. And the art of which they spoke of at that time was actually music. What happened that would have shifted it then, that they had to be so critical and so upset? Does anybody know? Yes, Quasi.
I guess it might have been like the introduction of records. I don't know.
And what was it? What was it being played on? Let me see how all you thinking.
The gramophones.
Yes. And we all know that this is where the Grammy comes from, right? Are we aware of that? All you know that? So where all you? Oh, okay, Jamie said.
Or the award itself.
That's right. That's where the award comes from, because the gramophone was the first piece of technology created that allowed for the music industry to be born.
Mm-hmm.
And as that technology became pervasive, what did that mean then, no class? It meant that people did not, Kelly says, no, I am. It meant that people did not have to go to a place. I was today years old. It meant that people would not have to go to a place to consume music. They could stay where and listen to music now. Where? In the homes, right?
Comfort of the house.
Also meant the gramophone played what Quasi just said, records. So records were being made in a particular way. So what that means then, that music was being recorded. And if music was being recorded, it also meant now that it could be preserved. That means you could hear it through another medium. So besides the gramophone that played it home for you, where else then could you have eventually heard music? What way?
Radio.
Radio. Awesome, Roxanne. Well, you're good, you know. So all of this, Horkheimer and Adorno had a problem with. They said, but this not the art, this not art of music now. And who would have been the ones to have been propelling these changes? Would it have been the poor ordinary man, or would it have been persons with music, with money? And so this is why they said that the elite, the elite was only doing this not because they love music, but they realized they could make money. And so this is why they ended up calling this the culture industry. They say, but this is not art and culture again. This is the culture industry. And so based on that context and based on that labeling, or Adorno and Horkheimer arrived at these 2 points that I have placed there in that slide. But they went a step further and they basically identified the core point of view, which was then substantiated by some other points, which we will look at shortly. The core point was, in the first instance, as far as they're concerned, which I think you're clear on now, the arts and culture should only be developed for the aesthetic or for performance purposes. And they felt that any other purpose of the exploitation of the arts was just simply for the benefit of the elite. And how did they arrive at this claim? Adorno and Horkheimer basically argued these views, and we'll come back to the point of commodification. Right? They said that capitalist ownership of artists' creative works, they said that is what commodification leads to. They said that commodification leads to creativity being sacrificed for standardization and narrow storylines. They said that commodification leads to superficial differences being made by audiences who are just passive listeners. And last but not least, they said that commodification also leads to the consumer audience preferences being defined by the market. Now, let's talk about these. Can someone take one of those? Let's take the first one. Who's willing to discuss that with me? For me, sorry. Can you tell me if what Adorno and Horkheimer are saying there, is that relevant today? And if so, can you give an example of that? Yes, Janae. We'll take two for each one as the class is big. So we'll take Janae and Tonya for the first one. Yes, Janae.
Okay, Miss, for the first point, the capitalist ownership of artists' creative works, I think that falls in line of like record labels. Because like artists who are not knowledgeable or smart enough to like read their contracts and all that, in the end, most times record labels end up owning all their masters, so they get taken advantage of.
And what if they are smart? Don't we know of some smart ones where that has happened?
Well, yeah.
Because it's kind of like what Adorno and Horkheimer are saying, not so? That they structure it in a way that the elite win, that the capitalists win.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it goes up another way as well, in terms of like, say like if there's an artist who has no means or way or money to get his work out there, if a record label or agent finds him in whatever way, he might not see it. Yeah, he will just go with the opportunity.
So don't we have a prevalent example right now where that's going on? Not the latter, but the first one. Isn't there an artist right now who basically really ain't about that anymore? We've had examples of artists globally who've tried to get it. Who's this?
Yeah. Kanye was the most recent one.
Yes, Kanye, Michael Jackson. well, we know there's the conspiracy theory there. People say, well, is after he got out of it is when he died. So Michael Jackson was one who made sure bought his way out. Prince, that is why Prince at one point in time would have been called the artist formerly known as Prince, because the record label also owned the name, because that was his stage name. I believe there's I think it's Taylor Swift as well is going through that, or has gone through that. Yes, Tonya, tell me, what was your example?
I was want to talk about like art itself, like visual arts. I think like it's one of the most like pervasive things, because to like own a art piece, like a painting or something, like it's extremely expensive for like the most, popular ones, the ones you see in museums. They have such a high value to them. And yeah, I think it just reflects that sort of like gatekeeping of art, because then
Yeah.
especially when it like gets taken out of museums and things to be able to be put in like people's private homes, right? It reflects that sort of structure of like, I have access to this and you don't, because I have the financial means of being able to hold this and have ownership over it as compared to the public.
Yes, you were saying that, and immediately what comes to mind is the art gallery there that was the holder's home. Trying to remember what that is called, but I like there. It's the only place I've ever, because I like art, I like to go to art galleries. It's the only art gallery I've ever been to where I could go into a room and sit down and hold and watch what would be, as you say, very, what do we say? The expensive pieces, the treasured works, Casabon and Bosco Holder, and all of these artists that we consider to be the creme de la creme, Leroy Clark, and so on. I don't remember the name of the gallery. Is it something six? Is it, what is it called?
Not Gallery 101?
That's right, 101. That's it. That's it. You can go there and you can go in the back there and you will see some of these works that we're talking about. Outside of that, like Tanya is saying, yes, there's the gatekeeping. So there is that example. What about the second one? Creativity being sacrificed for standardization and narrow storylines. Who's going to give me two examples of that? Kevon and somebody else. Kevon and who? Esther Marie. So Kevon, go, and then Esther. No, Esther and then Kevon. Let's switch it up.
So I think as we spoke about carnival earlier and choice of bands or whatnot, that is something you could see a lot, especially with bands that we consider now to be pretty mass. Because I think when I did your course in year one for undergrad, cultural research methods, Jillian, you and I would have been in the same group for that. One of the things we looked at would have been the process by which Trini revelers create their pieces and stuff like that, as opposed to the more modernized bands and their designs and the stories or lack of stories that goes along with it.
Yes, thank you. Kevon?
Well, I was actually going to talk about carnival costumes too, but as Esther said it, let me switch it up a bit. But I'm going to stay with carnival. And I think when we think about what soca music has become from what it originally was, so with the advent of like super blue and tambu and stuff with the jump and wave, so the actual content of soca sort of disintegrated from the creativity, and it ended up being more of the jump and wave to be able to move a crowd. So it sort of lost the story and the actual creativity behind it.
So we don't like, instead of moving the crowd and waving, we move now to what? Waving the bamsi, basically.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, I like the power soak, I like the jump and wave, but it isn't where that is not the most creative use of what the soca was.
Some people might say the same thing of Trinidad genre, but we're not going to start that again.
Yeah.
People might say that. I'm seeing here Hollywood movies, yes. We can also see that with some kinds of novels, some genres of novels. They basically all have the same kind of storyline, especially if it's a romance. Soca Parang, that is true. Mills and Boone, they still have that door, Rox. Are you showing out your age again? I sure they gone past Mills and Boone now. But yes, Mills and Boone. For those of you who may know that. I'm seeing two in the chat here. Chutney Soca, that's true. Or they still have Mills and Boone's, Papa. Chutney Soca, that is true of Chutney Soca. I didn't realize that. Narrow standard. What do they sing about? Yes.
Well, is a yes or no for Chutney Soca?
It's a formula.
Yeah, I think they developed formula now. They're trying to. The Soca Parang, as Kelly suggested here in the chat, yeah, has become a little more smutty as opposed to Christmas and Soca Parang kind of.
Oh, it's true. I forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard some things that, yeah.
Everybody
That is
come
true.
with the phone and all kind of thing.
Yes. It's true. It's true. But Scrunter started that, didn't he?
Not to that extent.
Okay.
Both
Fair enough.
crazy.
I know people will say that of our bashment snooker, there are a lot of people who don't like bashment. And Trinidadians come to as a matter of fact, by the time Trinidadians are coming into crop over for that week, one would see the music shifting to what is considered more palatable because they can't dance to the bashment either. And of course they're not totally understanding what they're saying, but you get in a sense is that is a lot of smut. So I know that is also a set of bashment soca. Let's take the third one. Superficial differences being made by the audience who are just passive listeners. Who's gonna discuss that? Yes, Tonya, I agree they do. Superficial differences being made by the audience who are just passive listeners. Who are gonna give me examples of that? Two people who've not spoken already. Superficial differences being made by the audience who are just passive listeners or passive consumers. Don't just have to be a listener, but remember they were talking about music. Nobody? Where are my people? Yes, Kelly.
Well, wouldn't this take us back to the no appreciation for the bashment? They only really coming in just for the crop over, and they don't understand the bashment, so they have little appreciation for it. They would prefer to hear something that they are more familiar with.
No, it's not like that. Not on that end. So when they
Not
say
on that end.
superficial differences, it's like you're comparing and contrasting things, and that are not really distinctive. And this is because you're just taking what you're being given. So do we have any examples of where that happens in any aspects of commodity? Yes, Dominique, go ahead.
We could see that again in mass production, the costumes. Both of them have like this backpack wing thing, a little bikini beads, and some people are so convinced, well, hey, this one is blue. I want to go with this one because it's blue. And then
Yes,
this
and this looks
person will be
better.
like,
This is a
no,
darker
that's
shade of
not.
blue.
Exactly. And it's not really any big difference. You're literally wearing the same thing.
I myself have been guilty of that. Like, no, I don't want to wear that. I ain't sure about that. You see how that bra shape, and you see how them beads put there, and you see how, but really are superficial differences. There's these very minute differences that really, and as a matter of fact, I have recently been arguing, particularly when you go to the carnival outside of the Trinidad context, that it has affected the wearability of mass because the consumer, because what they say, superficial differences. So you find this happening, that audience being the third and fourth generation of the diaspora who don't really know much about carnival. They just know that their grandfather come from Trinidad and they love soca, and so they flock their way, if not to Trinidad Carnival, to the Jamaica Carnival, the St. Martin Carnival, the Bahamas Carnival, and so on and so forth. And you don't go to a mass camp now to pick your mass, do you? Where do you pick your mass now?
Online.
Online. And so what that mean now? That mean the phone, your fingers going so trying to zoom in and pinch this thing, not so? To try to see. And if you notice, many of them no longer even give you the shots where you're getting a 360-degree look. Many of the photos are quite static. And so you have to try to figure out what's going on there. And so what happens sometimes, my observation, this happened last year in Jamaica, because they are looking at what may be considered superficial differences as opposed to wearability. So for example, the way how that is that too small for you? And then of course, when it does not fit is a different challenge, or they don't know how to fit it. So superficial differences being made by the audience who are passive. So they're basically taking what they get because they're just happy to be in Jamaica, or they're happy to be in Tribe. You know, they're happy to get into what other band there's be so sought after. They're happy to get into Rogue and so on and so forth. So they don't understand they don't understand that it's really all of the same thing that they're being given, but they try to pick. Another example of this is you get it in music, where people, I remember back in the day when the boy bands were big, people used to argue about Backstreet Boys vis-a-vis, was it NSYNC? And were they not basically all singing the same kind of music, same kind of la la la?
No, they would not.
Look at that, you see? There you go, class. There you go. And we get this quite a bit in many aspects of the arts, where things are, and you would get it in soca as well, where people would argue about certain artists, and they're basically all in a similar genre singing a similar thing, you know. But people will have heated debates. No, he music is better. He this, he that, he third. He just sing this way, so on and so forth. Not art, but for example, that never ending debate between Apple and Android. Guilty. If I go on an Android phone now, I lost. I ain't able, I can't make. Can't make. Even with a computer, can't make. I would know where to start. But do they not do the same thing? Both platforms, they offer the same value. They give you what you need, but yes, superficial differences. And what do you think makes this happen? That, okay, don't answer that yet. Let's get to the fourth one before we go there. Consumer and audience preferences being defined by the market. What's that one?
Is that akin to hegemony?
Yes, explain for those who don't understand that.
I'm trying to remember my definition of hegemony right now.
Consumer and audience preferences.
Where you are fed one thing only, so that's what you come to expect alone. Basically, that's what that crafts your expectations, something like that.
Yes, correct. And where do we get that? Where are some of the examples? Where can we pull that from?
Well, again, music,
Mm-hmm.
movies,
Mm-hmm.
Clothes, fashion.
I think we'd also get that with cultural experiences, with
Yeah.
festivals or some contemporary events. Like we get that in carnival fets a lot. People say, no,
Carnival, yeah.
that was real good. And you are like, wait, but I went the same thing as them. That food was horrible.
Shows, a lot of carnival events, yes.
I have that problem. I have that. It's hard to teach that and then go. And you see everybody around you like they're having a whale of a time. And from the time I step through that door, oh gosh, I see any problems a mile off. And I just can't settle down. It's like, oh, what is this? But people say they had a ball. You know what? It was good. This was great. This was the best. Da, da, da.
You get that for theatrical shows too. Some theater.
Right, right. So, oh shucks. Yep, my cast experience this year. Me too, Kelly. Me too. Is it that you had a good time or you didn't see the point of it? Because I was challenged. I didn't see the point of it. But that is just me. No point, no point. There you go. I don't know who else. Oh, she left early. I didn't bother to leave her because I had guests, but I didn't see the point of it. So the thing is though, so we have said that all of what Adorno and Horkheimer had to say here, and this was written early 1940 something, I think this was. And we are saying that this is still relevant now. So my question is, if we go back to this slide before, it was in the wrong place. Is commodification a good thing? Let's hear your thoughts. Who hasn't had a chance to speak on this point going here? Is commodification a good thing? Let's hear. What do you think? Don't all rush at once. Is commodification a good thing? No one has a view? Yes, Kevin.
I would say yes. It's but I do agree with all of the stuff that Adorno and Horkheimer said. It is all true. It's completely true. But it is a good thing. Just like everything else, it's really about how you use it. So especially from an economic standpoint, so a lot of countries, their arts and culture and heritage and stuff, it should be able to have some sort of an economic value. But if you come back to marketing, so when I think of marketing and when I think of, selling products to persons, one of the first things what I always say, the first thing is you should look at what is the benefit you are going to provide to that person.
Right.
And once you provide a benefit, then that benefit can be monetized. So
Right.
really, so how we look at what benefits are we going to provide from our arts and culture, and as long as you're serving a purpose, you're serving a need, then it should be monetized, because
Okay.
you have to
Very
pay
well.
to sell it and produce it and put it out there, but you should not step away from the value that it actually provides.
So that sounds like a matter of balance as well. Tonya, what were you gonna say?
I feel like I just have an issue with the terminology of commodification, because I feel like it implies this like heavy sense of, turning it into simply an object of trade, right? That has it completely removes it from the entire the aspect of it as a whole. So I don't know. I think that's where my the relationship of commodification to like capitalist pursuit and to the idea that at the end of the day it's the markets and like the value of the good that is being sold that is the most important, is where like I find myself pushing back against this, like, is commodification a good thing? Because obviously you want to export like your culture and you want to be able to have your culture, have economic value and wealth, but I feel like the idea of commodification, I don't know, man. It just it does sit well with me. I don't know.
So that the idea of commodification, going through this process of how how arts and culture become cultural goods and services, we recognize that there's a capitalist process at work. And on the one hand, we want to welcome it, but at the same time, we're not too comfortable with the idea of commodification seeped only in a money-making vacuum. Am I correct with what you're saying there?
Yeah.
All right. Let's go by Esther. Tell me, Esther.
So I think, especially in areas where you're looking towards cultural tourism, especially both locally and internationally, commodification could be a good thing. But I know a lot of the concern that people have, especially as Tanya said, with the term commodification, you associate the commodification with mass production.
Yeah.
And when you hear mass production, you think of a lesser value or something that is watered down or it goes outside to be produced. So I think commodification could be a good thing once we pay close attention to and we manage and control the authenticity of the heritage and the values embedded in the thing that we want to produce.
Yes. So again, I'm
So
hearing the point about balance.
Because I remember, for example, a couple years ago when island people was still around, island people at the time would have been a fairly large carnival band, and they were one of the more elite bands, that you would want to play with on the road. But the thing with them at the time versus tribe is that island people was still mass producing, but locally. And so you would still have the human touch of everybody there actually sitting and making the costumes, hand sewing this, measuring persons, tailor making to individuals. Same thing as legacy.
Yes.
And then I think when you look at large bands later down, that essence of commodity kind of spiraled out of control, where we felt like we needed to outsource, and the quality of things dropped, the storyline of things dropped, the heritage value of it decreased. So I know that it can possibly be a good thing, but I understand the concern that people have with it in terms of watering down the culture embedded in the thing.
Right. Okay, Patrian, your comment, and then we'll move on again.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was talking to the mic when it was muted. The last person I spoke, I was Esther, was writing while she was talking. Yes, she touched on some, like, a similar point that I had with regard to cultural tourism or tourism on the whole, because I believe that commodification has its negatives and positives, but more positives, because when it comes to the longevity of culture within a space community of platform, whether it be the indigenous, the intangible or the tangible aspects of that culture, commodification is a good thing, because I think this is something that is often overlooked, like reviews on these tourist reviews on these websites like Travelocity and these other websites. So when they travel to particular Expedia, those things actually go a long way, because if it is you're going to visit a country and you're not sure about the country and you type in the country and stuff, those reviews tend to pop up, and you tend to actually find people on particular pages, because that's actually how two persons actually got onto my Facebook page, and I forwarded them to the Visit Trinidad page, because that's where all the local stuff was. So that actually is the tourist reviews, that particular tourist experience is something that we tend to sometimes overlook, and by that we need to pay a bit more attention to that, the little things like the little tulum, those little things that we overlook, those things that they like when they come to a particular space. So I believe commodification is a good thing.
So do you realize then, class, that our discussion has brought us full circle? Because it means, therefore, that we recognize that balance is key. And as I believe it's Kelly saying here in the chat, it brings us back to what type of value you're looking to extract. And that extract could be in terms of you, the producer, or you, the consumer, you see. Because on the one hand, and I agree with all of the comments that were made, commodification for us, especially us operating in small developing economies, because we have to be concerned about sustainability for our society. It has to be a balance. It has to be that we recognize what does not need to be commodified to the extent that we will lose the intrinsic value of it that is tied to our heritage and our traditions and what have you, but at the same time recognize the importance of commodification, and in a sense that we utilize strategies. We have a strategic approach to how we go about pursuing the production of culture, that we could maintain that balance. And I suppose if we are to talk about balance, then it's important that we also know of the theoretical perspective that encourages us to see commodification as a good thing. We just spoke about Adorno, and we were able to see through Adorno's thesis that there are aspects of commodification that are not too positive, and we were even able to give examples of it. But we also recognize, based on our own experiences, that commodification is important to sustainability if we look to strike the balance and if it is clearly critically managed. And in that regard, one can certainly look at what the cultural studies view has to say in terms of seeing cultural industries development and commodification as something that can be of benefit. And the first thing that the cultural studies perspective advances is the fact that commodification isn't just about capitalism, but commodification is also about going through a process of converting the arts and culture to products and services that more people can access. And anytime the arts and culture has broad mass appeal, we refer to it as popular cultures. And so the cultural studies view, which will be a la Stuart Hall, the same book I was showing you there, they believe that commodification in this regard is a good thing because through commodification, what we have to offer can reach more persons. So I suppose, in a sense, the virtual showcasing of carnival as a possibility or is being seen as an opportunity in that regard. I see people writing that if we go that route, more people will be able to see it. I'm not hearing much people talk about how that digital economy is going to work, but I am hearing them talk about the fact that if it's showcased that way, it means therefore that you will get a greater audience or consumption impact. Have you not heard that? I certainly am hearing that. I'm not hearing a work out the dollars and cents, but
Yes, I heard that. The dollars and cents wasn't necessarily discussed, you see. It was discussed on how they can keep some of the creators of the content get
yeah,
it paid, but not necessarily how it's going to make any money virtually.
right,
So
right,
that's the part of the
right,
discussion that's missing.
right. Can we think of other examples um where we can see through commodification we have created popular cultures that have significant impact apart from the carnival from the region? I can think of one straight off the top of my head there, quite easy. Notting Hill Carnival has been a good example of the virtual carnival. Okay, yes, I heard that, Ava, this is true. Yes, dancehall. Dancehall is a very sound example of this, where the popular culture, I mean, it would have been rooted out of, is it Mento Ska and all of you, I don't know all of the various genres, but certainly coming down now to dancehall, one has a music genre that has become globalized and has certainly become quite pervasive in terms, yes, from reggae, thank you. It certainly has become quite pervasive in the region alone. Most of the collective agencies will tell you, apart from money being sent back to the US for that set of foreign music, a lot of it goes to, well, it is to the US because a lot of those artists are signed to US labels. But for those who are signed to the local that is signed to the local copyright agency, a lot of them, that money goes to Jamaica. A significant portion of money coming out of court, apart from foreign music, goes to dancehall because of the amount of it that is played on the airways. So dancehall is one of these examples where a popular culture has become quite pervasive, and of course, one can easily talk about the dancehall music industry in its own right. The cultural studies theorists also argue that popular culture usefully allows for operating in a contradictory space of resistance and commercialization. And for me, this is the point that harps at the balance that we keep talking about. And what is really meant here is if we take, for example, if we look at our carnival as a whole, on the one hand, we have we say that carnival is for freeing up. The Monday and Tuesday are not even holidays. So and we come and we do carnival because there's this proclamation that is made that allows us to take to the streets and we do as we like. And I mean, we see people partake in carnival and not necessarily their diet is not necessarily a tribe or any of those bands, not so. And juxtaposed to that, we can still see within the carnival scale the traditions, the pan, traditional masquerade, Blue Devils still take to the streets, and so on. And so when we talk about that contradictory space, the cultural studies theorists are of the view that popular culture allows for that coexistence. And for me as a strategist, what I say to people is that we have to find ways to take advantage of that, to exploit that in a positive way. I often see that as the the nexus, the important nexus, if you are looking for sustainability in whatever excuse me, whatever aspect excuse me, of the arts and culture that you operate in. If it is that you can maintain your resistance, so to speak, which is very much tied to authenticity, and at the same time find ways to commodify that allow for a popular culture manifestation coming out of what you're offering. And I'm seeing here, yes, I agree with that, Eva, definitely. Black culture on a whole has been widely commodified and is now part of a popular international culture, hairstyles, mannerism, fashion, rap. I agree. And of course, for those who identify with black and brown, I mean, and we've seen it in a negative sense, unfortunately, of people trying to be black who are not black, which is interesting that Eva should have used this example. Because again, now this is an example of where commodification has been so successful that it has allowed people to mimic something that are not of them. You see how the discussion of cultural identity becomes so important? Yes, cultural appropriation. Yes. And so the cultural studies view is a very useful perspective that we must consider in terms of helping us to understand how we can reach that balance. I too am of the view that the artists and audience are not always passive. Um, consumers of the art form. I'm going to share it back. Don't worry. For some reason, it just dropped out. Because if I take, for example, like a Freetown Collective or a Three Canal, I don't see them as passive actors at all. I actually see them as giving important contribution that does become commodified on particular levels and adds to the diversity of what we have in terms of what comes out as soca or calypso or whatever you may call that their genre of music. I don't know if that's soca, I don't know if it'll fall in calypso, but it certainly is what comes out during the carnival. And there are other examples that we can look to from fashion, even visual art, where people do not necessarily go with the status quo. Every artist is not necessarily an artist that paints landscape and what have you, but there are those who try to stay true to their perspective, and they have found ways to commodify that without necessarily losing the essence of what they are offering. So therefore, I would think that if we are to argue balanced class, we want to be able to first identify and recognize that commodification does have some negative impact. And to do so, we would identify the work of Adorno and Horkheimer and use that to give examples of how we see commodification having a negative impact. And then on the other hand, we would then recognize that commodification does have an important role to play, and therefore look to the cultural studies view as a way to examine how indeed one can strike that balance, that we can take advantage of commodification without necessarily it doing damage or destroying what then, as we say, what is the intrinsic value of what we may consider our arts and culture. And what does this all have to do with value? Well, we started off by saying that value is about choice, that value is hinged in decisions that you make. And we recognize that value is the thing that drives this commodification. And so we needed to understand how is it that people would arrive at choosing what they do And this is where Throsby's thesis came in. But even within that, we recognize that sometimes the idea of commodification isn't always seen as a good thing. And Adorno and Horkheimer present to us that thesis that argues that culture should just have this one value. We saw how their argument made sense in terms of how it relates to the our world right now, how it is that we still can see the negative effects of commodification and when we view culture beyond the aesthetic. But we also recognize that if we are to see the arts and culture have a long-lasting impact on our society, that we must strike that balance. We must seek that balance. And therefore, from a theoretical framework, the cultural studies gives us room to make that argument because it offers to us 3 or 4 important points to show how the idea of commodification can be valued positively. And so, class, at this time, I will ask if you have any questions, any comments on what we have discussed. Anyone? Everybody's good? Not hearing a soul. Are we all still
Good so
here?
far. Great session.
Right.
Good.
Right. So this is where we will stop today, class. Thank you for your discussion as usual. And I will be posting up the lecture as well as the slides. And I will, of course, post the relevant readings. What's this Ava saying? Oh. Yeah. It's 8:56, Ava. Yes, Jamie.
I just have one note on Teams platform. I got these slides and stuff, but I wasn't able to access the recording of the class, the last class. It gave me a strange notification. Let me tell you what it says.
Stream
That's in an email later on too. It was a strange something it told me. I was not looking for it. I took a screenshot of it. Just pull it up. Where is it? So many screenshots, boy. Wow. Right. It's telling me invalid token for the Microsoft Stream.
Okay, so I'm going to.
And then the video, and then that video couldn't be found.
Oh,
I got those
wow.
2 notifications. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to take a check and see if I have to join you all to the stream as well. And I somehow thought I placed it in the body of the chat, so no one was able to access the video.
I went in that same page you're on top of there, somewhere it had the link and I clicked on it, and that's when it gave me those 2 messages.
The link at the top of the page after the reading.
Yeah.
Able to access readings, but not the not
the actual
recording.
Yeah.
I wonder. This is strange. It said invalid.
Yeah, it told me invalid authentication, and then they weren't able to access the stream. No, sorry, the stream was no longer available. No, not available. Or something. That's not the exact word. I might be using the wrong paraphrase. The video couldn't be found.
Wow, and it's still here, you know. Okay.
Yeah, which I found it was strange too, so I didn't.
I'm going to go back into the stream and see if it is that I have to join you all to there. But the idea is that once it's here, as far as I know, you all are supposed to be able to access it, but I'm going to take a look and see what's going on there. And the way how it is, I can't even share it from here. I'm going to try sharing it to Outlook and see if you would get it from there as well. But I will take a look at that. So that would be quite unfortunate.
Yeah, and as you mentioned Outlook, I want to let the class know if they haven't discovered this before, when you sign into your UE email and you reach into the Outlook in your Outlook box, on the top left hand side where there's the grid, the 9 dots, when you click on that, you can go straight to Teams from there. I know, and some people would be having difficulties now. So just in case.
So you could get it from there as well.
Direct email, yeah. You would see any. It's like a drop-down box comes up when you click on those 9 dots, and you would see Teams as one of the last. Well, it shows up as the one of the last options for me, but when you click on it, it brings you straight into the meeting. Usually,
have you all placed Stream? Have you all downloaded the Stream app? Stream is actually an app. So do you all have the Stream activated in your Teams? That might be part of it. So can you do that for me? I'm now realizing when you look to the left hand side of Teams, you're seeing a bar there, seeing activity, chat assignments, Teams, calls, files, and at the bottom, you're seeing apps before, just above help. Check and see if it requires.
Nah, I don't have that. I'm only seeing activity, chat, Teams, files, and then help.
Same here.
The other thing I want you all to do is to go into your options. See if you can find where your options button is. Options. Where did I see options? It may be that you'll see it when you come out of our class, but look for your options button and scroll and make sure that you have turned on. It says, allow me to access recent updates of Teams. Make sure that's clicked on. That may also be one of the reasons why you're not seeing some of these things. So do check that for me as well. Right? I'm trying to remember where I saw options, but I believe you may have to come out of the meeting, and when you do it, somewhere it is, you will see it on the page there. I'm not seeing it right now, but I know it's there because I had to do the same thing. You see, manage channel is not that. All right, so check for that as well. And that is supposed to allow you to then have greater access to some of these other options that they have here on the it's not there either. Right?
I actually think some of the reason why we're having some of these problems because I could only access the classes as the university guest.
That is the way. That
is it.
Yeah, that is it. Apparently, that is how they have set it up. Why, I don't know.
Because I have two but I have on my I don't know if everybody has it, but on my account I have two drop down window with next to the icon with your name on your right hand side, and I have the option to use the University West Indies, and then I have it as the guest.
Right.
Yeah, I have the same thing.
I wonder if that's from isn't that from when I would have joined you all initially when we had orientation?
Maybe, yeah, perhaps, but that is the only way I've been able to access anything else anyway as a guest.
You will only ever be a guest. I'm watching all y'all here and I'm seeing guests because of how the university has set it up.
Well, I did see at the start of it, it said as a guest, we don't get certain features. When I first started things.
But mind you, I'm seeing Patreon's here. Hers doesn't say guest. That's the interesting thing.
That's interesting. And when I try to use the account not as a guest, it doesn't allow me access.
No, it wouldn't.
I was just about to mention, when I logged in, it went straight to this account, and I had opened the Outlook, the message, and I clicked join. So it opened up in this profile because I realized I have the same double profile as everyone else, but it opened in this one. So I don't know.
You lucky you.
but the thing is, I'm not seeing any of the classwork, none of the files, anything.
So y'all still are not seeing the classwork?
No, I can see the classwork.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything.
But she's not a guest. Maybe that's the difference.
Who's still not seeing the classwork? Antonia, you're still not seeing it?
I could see the classwork now that I using my tablets. I could now see the classwork, but before I was struggling with my laptop. So I had to carry that to service to see if there's a problem with the laptop itself or if it's the app that giving trouble. Because that app really messed up my my laptop.
Teams has a way, it forces you to have to upgrade your machine as far as you can. That I gathered from colleagues, even for the Mac. But I think I got away because I was using Teams before because of an advisory board I'm on for CDB. I think that's how I got away. So when university shifted over and I clicked on, it just carried me right back to the Teams that I would have downloaded on account of them, and it just switched me on to the Joantel, whatever for UWI. But I agree, it really is challenging. I'm still not, because the fact you all can't see the recording, that is quite, I don't even know what to say about that.
I am seeing the links for the recordings in the posts. But you can't open it. When you click on it, you have to apparently you have to download the stream app.
That is what I'm saying. You have to download the stream app. So can you all do that for me, please? And then you will be able to access, I believe. So this is, I'm sorry, it's the university put us in this millie. So one more app you have to download.
That's fine, but I'm not even getting the option for. Can I get the streams app else on the web because it's not coming up in.
Well, I think Google, because that is what I normally do with Microsoft. Everything to do with this Teams, I Google, and I find it comes up. There are all these support groups that come up. So they basically then lead you to tell you what it is you should do or what you could do. So I would suggest that.
Dr. Sal, I downloaded the stream app, but it is still saying that the video couldn't be found, that the content may have been removed.
All right, let me go on it. Let me make sure that is open and not locked away. So mine is loading right now.
Dr. Sal, exactly how you are seeing your stream app, that is how I am seeing mine. When I clicked on stream app, it just opened like if I had stream app already.
Right. But you still can't see the video.
Yeah, I can't see, but I can't see anything from the class notes, nothing.
Oh boy. Linked groups channels. All right, let me see if it's this. But look at see all your linked. But what trouble is this? Welcome to St. Augustine. Upload a video. All right, let me see. No, but it's not that. Create a channel. What is this? All right, I'll have to investigate and see if that is how I'm supposed to do it. Because I'm seeing the video right here. But this is so very strange. All right, I'll investigate that. Perhaps I've stumbled on what I may need to do here. Maybe I have to do one other thing to make sure then that you all can see it. And I'm seeing it saying private, but it should be, it's saying that you all are supposedly inside of here. So I'll work on that. I'll try and see if I can rectify that when we come out of class, because that is quite strange. Okay, I'm seeing membership. Oh, but this is strange. Are you all still seeing my screen? All your names are here. This is so very strange. One of the things I want you also to do when you would have received the email, look, Quasi, now put it here. So Quasi, you've put this here because what? That is, are you able to access it this way?
That's the link. That's the link for the last class.
But it's not, you're not able to access it.
But later I'll try to download the app and see what goes on.
But one of the others said that they downloaded it and still. Anyway, I'm going to try and see if there's something that I have to open that I have not done so that is preventing you from seeing it. I'll look at that as soon as we come off. Also, too, if you've not done so, because sometimes I see that where I would see the list and sometimes they'll tell me who has accepted and who have not. So if you make sure and accept, manage permissions. Let me see this now. Make sure and accept being in the Teams group and the class and whatnot. Sometimes that seems to be part of the challenge as well. I don't know. One or two of my students from other classes said when they accept, they are able to see things better. It's I don't know. This is a very strange one. But hopefully we'll get it nailed down before the semester ends and we could operate in peace. If by next week we're still having challenges with it, I'll just have to try and find a way that y'all can get access. But I know for sure the recordings will be a challenge because it seems as though once you click end recording, it saves it automatically within Teams. It's not like you have a way of getting at it like what Zoom allows. Zoom saves it directly onto your hard drive, which then you can send it to whoever you want, but not this one. So I'll have to try and see what's another way. All right, class, I'm really sorry about that, but let me try and see if I can rectify that as quickly, and I will send a message in the chat and you'll tell me if you can access.